Well, it's that time of year where we're having to balance between closing out the quarter strong and the year end strong and starting to think about kicking off a strong start to the next year. And what we have to be careful about is not over rotating on closing out the year and in turn sacrificing our ability to start the year off strong going into next year. And so, what we tend to see is leaders and teams will over rotate and they'll spend the final month of the year focusing on trying to close out deals and not thinking about next year. And then they spend the first 3 or 4 weeks of the coming year thinking about the upcoming kickoff. And that ends up to be, 6 to 8 weeks of non productive time out of your calendar. So let's fix that. Let's look at a plan to really balance focusing on the quarter end close and kicking off next year. So, what does that balance need to look like? Well, it may be counterintuitive, but about 70% of your time should be focused on closing out the quarter, and at least 30% of your time reserved for thinking about next year and starting some strategic planning. So, in order to make sure you're spending the right 70% on the right deals, think about your active deals on the pipeline and think about four things. One, are you focusing on deals that have genuine engagement in the last 30 days and a lot of activity? So they're very active. Do you have executive sponsorship? Gartner recently studied a lot of B2B transactions over the last couple of years, and they found that over 80% of transactions have executive sponsors involved. And so, do you have executive sponsorship? If not, your deal may be at risk, and you may not be as far along as you think. Have they progressed the sales cycle to the right stage and completed the right milestones? And then finally, is there a sense of urgency in the minds of your client and the buying committee? So, if all four of those are on par and answered in a positive, then those are probably reasonably active and likely deals for you to close. If not, you probably shouldn't be focusing too much of your time on them right now. So that leads to freeing up about 30% of your time thinking about the next year and starting off strong. And so here's three things to think about. You want to think about kind of the short term, the medium term, the long term. One is just being realistic about those deals that are not going to close this quarter and making sure that each team member responsible for those deals has a documented close plan in place and steps to close so that they don't just linger in Q1 because they didn't close in Q4, but we've got a strong sense of urgency and specific action plan to close them out in January if they weren't able to make it into this fiscal year. Secondly, medium term, think about guiding the teams to document their Q1 plan to meet their first quarter number. And so, what opportunities in the pipeline do they have that are going to get them there? Right? Are there some key steps that they need to put in place with their sponsors in terms of securing budget, creating or emphasizing that sense of urgency to get those deals done in the first quarter and making sure that the first quarter is going to be a solid quarter? And then the third focus is that longer term. So it's not too soon to begin thinking about your overall 2025 plan, your coverage strategy, and how your pipeline coverage maps to the quota or the expectations of the business. Are there some specific actions you can begin to think about taking early on in the year so that you set yourselves up for success? So we'll share more about strategic planning for 2025 in future videos. But leaders, I encourage you to think about making sure that you balance your team's time and their time strategy accordingly. So it's likely going to be about 60 to 70% on active deals, but don't let them off the hook in terms of setting themselves up for success with the remaining 30 to 40% and starting to think ahead in terms of January, Q1, and then longer term for the year.